Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And I hope that wherever you are joining us from, whether it is locally or somewhere even on the other side of the world, you are coming ready to explore a world of very interesting animals. Because the topic that we have today is called No Bones, No Problem. So we're going to be exploring some animals that are a little bit different than you and I. And in fact, I have some of them right behind me. But as we have our time of exploration together today, I would love for you to participate along with us by letting us know what kinds of observations you're making. What are you noticing? What kinds of questions do you have? And you can contact us by the number that's on the screen. You can text us at 562 286 1838 with any questions, observations, any interactions with us that you want to have. Now, if you're watching this at a later time and you're watching it from our YouTube channel, one of our pre-recorded videos, you're welcome to still participate along with us and ask us any questions that come to your mind when you're watching this by emailing us at live@lbaop.org. LB stands for Long Beach, Aquarium of Pacific. So feel free to participate along with us. I would love to hear from you. So, as we're exploring this world of animals that have no bones, it's kind of crazy to think about, isn't it? As we're watching these animals move behind us, what are some of the things that stand out to you? What do you wonder about? Because imagine if you were like this. If you were just like a jelly behind me, floating in the water, how is this animal surviving? Because it looks very different than you and I look. In fact, let's think about our own bodies for a minute. We have, well, what are some things that we have that help us to survive? Well, we have a head. We have, let's see, on our head, we have eyes that help us see. We've got a nose to help us smell and breathe. We've got a mouth to help us communicate and also help us breathe and to help us eat and chew our food. We've got teeth for chewing our food. Then we've got, arms and fingers to help us grab things. We've got legs and feet to help us move. And then, very importantly, we do have this spine going up and down our back. We call it a backbone, but it's actually made of several different bones, all stacked up on top of each other. And each one of those bones is what we call a vertebra. And if you have them all stacked up together, we call those vertebrae. And anything that has vertebrae or a backbone, also called a spine, is called a vertebrate. So you and I are both vertebrates. So say that loud and say it proud. I am a vertebrate. I didn't hear you. Better say it a little bit better. Say, I am a vertebrate. Very good. So this is that word right here, vertebrate, because it has vertebrae, those little bones all stacked up on top of each other. Now, let's imagine we didn't have any bones and we didn't have those vertebrae. Would I be able to stand up nice and straight and tall like this? Obviously not. Can you show me what would happen to you if you didn't have any bones? Go ahead and stand up straight because right now you are a vertebrate. So go ahead, wherever you are, just stand up nice and straight and tall. And now say, I am a vertebrate. Now we're going to make you an invertebrate. An invertebrate means we're going to take all those vertebrae away and you're going to go blah, 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 and just blob down to the floor. Are you a big blob on the floor right now? Yes, a big blob on the floor. Now, how are you going to move? How are you going to do anything? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring today. Invertebrates are animals that have no vertebrae. So invertebrate. So it's just like vertebrate, like those with backbone, but that in front of it means it has none of them. So no vertebrae. So if you're an invertebrate, like a sea jelly, how would you survive in the ocean? Well, first of all, they don't have bones, so they don't have much structure. Do they have legs on their bodies to help them walk and move? I don't see any. What do they have? How is this animal moving right here? Well, can you be a jelly? Can you move like a jelly moves? Well, I don't know. How do you do that? You have to give yourself a big round shape because I notice a big round shape on them. Again, no bones in it, but go ahead and give yourself a big round shape. Imagine you're all round on top. And this thing is called a bell. So that round part is a bell. And go ahead and just make that bell move up and down and up and down. And you just kind of float and go wherever the ocean current takes you. So that's what's happening here. These animals are just moving along wherever the water is flowing. We call those animals plankton. Plankton is something that can't swim against an ocean current, and they move wherever the water goes. Did you know that jellies were considered plankton? Have you heard that word before? We oftentimes think about plankton as being something really small and tiny that we can't see. And while it is true that something that can't swim against, or something that's really small and tiny, is not going to be able to swim against an ocean current very well, it doesn't have to be small and tiny. It can be large and obvious, like the sea jellies floating through the water. Well, we also talked about how we have eyes to help us see. Well, do you see any eyeballs on the jellies? No, not exactly. But they do have the ability to sense where there's light and maybe where it's dark. So right here, right in this little area where the edges of the bell, see how they kind of look like they're scooped and they kind of come up and then they kind of go down and then they kind of come up again? Well, in these areas where they come up, do you see that little kind of white spot right there? That white mark is where they have the ability to see things. Now, they don't see pictures and images like you and I do. But they do have the ability, like I said, to sense where it's dark and where it's light. But then when we see things with our eyes, where does that information travel to? It goes into our brain, which is protected by a big bone, which is called our skull, or actually several bones all fused together. So our skull protects our brain, and our brain takes all the information from our eyes and from our hands, from the rest of our body, and it processes it and does fancy stuff with it and sends out more messages so our body knows what to do with that information. Jellies, not only do they not have a skull to protect a brain, they don't even have a brain. They have no brain whatsoever. So this is an animal that doesn't think. It just kind of exists and floats. Isn't that wild? Yeah, they have no way of really thinking about what they're doing. They just kind of go wherever the ocean current takes them. Now, as they float, they're not completely helpless because they have the ability to protect themselves. What do they have to protect themselves? Yeah, these long, skinny things right here. What are those called? Do you know? Yeah, they're stingers on their tentacles. So these are the tentacles. And I heard somebody say stingers. But yes, they can sting their food. So you can sting, or they can sting their food and grab it so that they can eat. So even though they don't have a brain, they still have these long tentacles. So imagine you had long tentacles hanging off of you and you're just kind of floating and moving however the ocean current was making you move, just like these jellies here. But then a fish runs into you. Well, guess what? You don't even have to think about it. Your tentacles just do it for you. They, as soon as something brushes up against it, they sting it and they grab it, and then it moves on up to where their mouth is and into their stomachs. Now, it's interesting, you and I just have one stomach, but jellies can have more than one. They usually have more than two, usually more than three. In fact, you can even see where the stomachs are on this jelly right here. This is what we call a moon jelly, and I can see this flower-shaped petal thing here in the middle. Well, this has 1, 2, 3, 4 of these petal-shaped things, and that is where they are digesting their food. So you can think of it as being 4 stomachs. And I can see this one also has 4 stomachs. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we were to count all of these, we'd probably see that most of them have 4 stomachs. But occasionally there are some that have less, and occasionally there are some that have more. So these animals can float around, grab their food, and eat, even though they're not having a brain to think about it. Now, there's another type of invertebrate that has a little bit more to them. Now, I have a plushie of one of these. What animal is this? Were you going to say starfish? Ah, I like what you're thinking, except I noticed one thing. This animal doesn't really look like a fish, does it? Because if we think about a fish, fish all have a backbone. They have vertebrae. And so does this have any bones? This one doesn't have any bones. Fish have bones. They're vertebrates. This is an invertebrate. So instead of calling this a fish, oh, and another thing I notice about it is it doesn't have any fins. Fish have fins, right, to help them swim. This one doesn't really go swimming through the water with fins, does it? How does this animal move? Can you think of a way that this animal might move through the water? Or does it move through the water, or does it crawl on the ground? Or does it float at the surface? How does this animal move? So it's kind of interesting to think about, even though this animal doesn't have bones like we do, it doesn't have like 2 legs and 2 feet to move like we do. It does have some pretty interesting adaptations that help it survive in its watery home. But how? This all these things on the underside, these are not tentacles. These are not stingers. These are their feet. So let's take a closer look. This is what we call tube feet. Now I did mention that these aren't fish because fish don't have feet, do they? So instead of calling these a starfish, even though it's shaped like a star, we call it a sea star because it is shaped like a star and it lives in the sea. We don't want people to be confused and think that it's a fish because we know fish are vertebrates. These are invertebrates. Animals with no bones are called invertebrates. So let's take a closer look at these crazy feet. How many do you think they have? Well, they have a lot more than just 2. I see 2 right here. But there's so many more. I actually can't count them all. It would take me a really long time. But let's just say, it's safe to say they have hundreds of feet. Hundreds of feet that help them move and move the ocean. You really don't see sea stars floating or swimming through the water. You see them all feet. Great picture of some 2 feet of a sea star. Now this sea star, what do you notice about this one? Does it have the same number of arms that you think well, the points on a star? Usually we think about having 5 points on a star. Does this one have 5 points? No, I see a lot more. Should we count them? Because it seems like there's a lot. This is actually a type of a star called a sunflower star. Let's see how many arms this one has. Let's start right here. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Can you believe that? 18 arms on this sunflower star. So they've got lots of arms and lots of legs, or not legs, lots of 2 feet, lots of feet on those arms to help them move. They can move pretty quickly across the bottom of the ocean floor. Now here at the aquarium, we are actually working on raising sunflower stars like this so that we can release them back out into the ocean because their numbers went way down recently. A lot of the sunflower stars in the ocean were getting sick. So we're helping to raise sunflower stars that one day we can get some more out of the ocean. So we've looked at sea stars, we've looked at sea jellies. These are both pretty incredible invertebrates. But there are also some other interesting animals that don't have bones. But not everything that doesn't have a bone is all squishy on the outside. It can be actually kind of hard. Can you think of any animals that don't have bones that live in the ocean, but they might have something hard to protect them? Because think about it, if you don't have bones on the outside of your body, it means you're probably pretty squishy. So if you're pretty squishy on the inside, it's really nice to have some sort of protection on the outside. Can you think of anything that would be good to protect yourself? Well, let's think about it. You know, even people, if we wanted to protect ourselves from something, there might be a shield that you hold. Think about North America. So a shield can be a protection. What kind of protection could an animal in the ocean have? Well, what if they took a shield and they put it on their back? Think of any animals that do that? Oh, well now if you're thinking of a sea turtle, I gotta warn you, sea turtles are not invertebrates. They are vertebrates, just like you and I, except their bones are actually part of their shell. So they do have a shell to protect them. They also have vertebrae inside their shells as part of their shell. So sea turtles are cool, but we're not going to talk about them. Okay, that's all we're going to say about the sea turtles because they're vertebrates. But have you thought of any animals that have vertebrates that make shells? How about this? In fact, do you even know what you're looking at? What kind of thing is this? Well, this actually has a lot of really cool colors on it. I've never seen something like this before. picture that we were just looking at, this is an example of one of those. Now, this is just the empty shell of it. But what kind of animal makes a shell like this? See, if we were to pick it up and look at it on the inside, you see this big opening here. Well, what do you think could be in that opening? Have you come up with any ideas? Now, maybe you're thinking, oh, a hermit crab. A hermit crab could live in something like that. And you're absolutely right. A hermit crab could live in something like this. But this shell is not made by the hermit crab. This shell is made by a snail. Yeah, what you're looking at right here is a turban snail. So this kind of shell that has a sort of whirl to it that comes up to a point. From the side, it kind of looks like a triangle, but from the top, it looks like a circle. Well, it's made by this snail. So a snail is an invertebrate that has a soft body. And look, you can even see its eyes. So there's one eye right there. There's another white eye right there with a little dot in it. And then this is where, oh, it also has two little antennae that stick out like this. And then this is what it's sticking onto things and what it's moving with. This is its foot. And probably right underneath there is its mouth too. So this is the shell that is made by this snail. Now, this is what we call a mollusk. So a mollusk is an animal that makes a hard shell that it lives inside of. Now, when mollusks are born, they hatch out of their eggs as little miniature versions of the adult. So it actually looked just like this, but much, much smaller. And so their shell was really tiny, and it starts with the tip. And then what they do is they keep creating shell, and they make that shell bigger and bigger and bigger, and so they get bigger and bigger, and they have more space inside. So this is what it looks like on the inside. If I was to kind of show you, like you could have X-ray vision through the shell and what it looks like on the inside, this is what it looks like. It has this, it's almost like a spiral staircase, this little spiral going down like this. So as the snail grows, it starts off up here, and then it adds on and adds on, and so it keeps adding onto that shell. So this is what it looks like on the inside, and this is what it looks like with all that outer shell covering on it. But I think it's pretty cool to actually take a good look at a turban snail shell. Now, when the snail dies and their soft body decays and gets eaten up by another animal in the ocean, or maybe a bird on the beach, well, then they leave their hard shell behind, and then an animal like a hermit crab could come in and take over. But let's look at some of the other animals that are over here and figure out what they might be. Do you recognize any of these other things that I have? Because this is also something that might look familiar to you. Does that look familiar? Are you thinking, I've seen this before, it's a seashell. You're right, it is a seashell, but remember, every seashell is made by a living animal. So what kind of living animal makes this one? Well, this one is called a scallop. So you may have been thinking, that's a clam, because clams are very, very similar. In fact, this one, it's a scallop. We might think of them as looking like clams, but I want you to look carefully. Look at the lines. Do you see the lines that are in here? You see how they kind of start in the middle at the bottom, and then they come out, and they go this way. They kind of go to the edges of the shell. So it's almost like your hand. Like if you were to open your hand up and you see the lines of your hands going like this, well, this is what a scallop shell looks like. All the lines come out this way. Now, just like a clam, they have two shells. So they have two halves. I'm only holding on to one of them. So imagine it had another one that looked just like this on the other side. And then it protects, those two shells together protect the animal living inside. So they have a soft body, and they use their shell to protect themselves. Now, if you were to compare it to a clam, here's a clam shell. Now, the clam, they both have, the inside part's a little bit wider. It's got a little bit of some curve to it, just like this one does. But if we were to look at the lines on this animal, on the clam, how do you notice they're different? Maybe we'll come back over here to my camera and we'll look again and we'll compare. So how do the lines move on the clam compared to, Actually, maybe I need to turn my lighting down. Maybe it'll make it easier to see. Does that make it a little bit easier? So do you see how these lines move this way? So instead of coming out from the middle like the scallop does, the clam's lines kind of go like this. So this is a clam shell. And then as a clam grows, it just keeps adding and adding and adding on until that shell gets bigger and bigger. Now there's also this other animal that also has 2 shells. But look at the inside of this one. This one's pretty different. These were all white. They're pretty white on the inside of them. But then this one has some color to it. Let me try to turn up the light so you can see the color a little bit better. They're a little bit darker, but they have kind of some shimmery color to them. These, also on the outside, if you'll notice, they have color to them too. This has some green on it and on a kind of a yellowish color. This is a mussel shell. Do you see a difference between the clam shell and the mussel shell? So mussels have 2 shells, just like the clam and the scallop, but they have a really long shape to them. See how much longer it is compared to kind of the fat shell of the clam? So this is a skinnier, almost more like a rectangle on the sides. It almost has 2 straight sides to it before it curves and gets pointed on this one end. So that's from a mussel. But there's another animal in here that I think also has a really pretty inside of the shell. Look at this. Any idea what this is? It kind of looks like a rock, but if you look carefully, you'll notice that this rock-looking thing has some interesting holes in it. In fact, it used to have holes right here and right here and right here, but as it grew, it actually filled those holes in. And as they grow, as they fill in some holes, it means they're creating new holes. So if this animal was to keep growing, it would have created a new hole right here and probably filled in this one. But let me turn it over so you can see what it looks like on the inside. Wow, this one is really pretty. This is what we call an abalone. Did any of you know that? Yeah, this is an abalone. Now, this abalone shell is beautiful on the inside. Sometimes they call this mother of pearl. It has this beautiful shimmery color to it. Sometimes you can see some pinks and purples and greens and blues. It's gorgeous. Now, the thing is, this was a snail. So there was a snail that lived underneath this shell, and we can probably show you what they look like when they're alive. Here are some abalone. Now, you can see that shell right here. It's kind of bumpy, but here you can see the one that had some of those holes that were filled in already. And here's some. Here's another one. You can see some of the holes on this shell. So these are snails that like to stick onto the rocks, and they like to stick hard. They don't like to let go. They sometimes you can see the black part of its body right here, and you can see these little tentacles that are sticking out here. So they have these little things that help them to sense what's around them and the environment around them. So those are the little sensory tentacles of the abalone as they're sticking onto the rock. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oop, this is an abalone over here too. 6. There's definitely 6. Oh, is that one? Another one? 7 right here in the background. I can't tell if that might be one up there or not. So there's a lot of abalone in this picture. But I bet that if you were to just walk by this or swim by it if you were snorkeling, you might not even notice it. They just kind of look like rocks sitting there. They don't move very much. But they're really neat animals. And the Aquarium of the Pacific has been a part of helping restore white abalone populations off our coast. And we've helped release thousands of white abalone, which were the first marine invertebrate to be put on the endangered species list. And so we're hoping that their numbers come back to healthy numbers off our coast where they used to be very abundant as well. So did you ever realize, though, that abalones were snails? Isn't that interesting? So we've got snails, we've got mollusks like, well, a snail is a mollusk too, but we have the bivalves, the ones with the 2 shells, like a clam and a mussel and a scallop. But there is something else interesting right here. This one right here is not a mollusk. It looks like a shell, but if you were to look carefully, it has these little tiny bumps on it. Notice it's a round shape. Can you think of any round animals in the ocean? And if you look at each one of those little tiny bumps, well, that shows you where they used to have one big, long spine attached to it. So that means all these little bumps, they must have had lots of spines. Can you think of anything that's round that has spines that come out all around their body and is purple or red in color? Sometimes even green in color? This is from this animal right here. It's called a sea urchin, a purple sea urchin in this case. But all those purple spines are attached where you saw one of those little tiny dots on that sea urchin test. We call it a test. It's not like a test with questions and quizzes like you would take in school, but that's what they call the sort of shell surrounding of the sea urchin. But I think it's kind of neat to understand how different these animals look when you might see evidence of them up on a beach when compared to how the animal looks when it's alive. So this living sea urchin looks very different than how the empty test of a sea urchin might look if you see it up on the beach after it's been eaten up by maybe a snail or a bird that might be interested in eating it up on the beach. But then there is, of course, this one fabulous thing right here. Now, if you look at this, isn't that beautiful? Look at that beautiful spiral shape that it has. This is a shell of an animal too, but this shell did not come from a snail, and it didn't come from a clam. This actually comes from a relative of an octopus, believe it or not. Yeah, it doesn't look like an octopus could live in that, could it? But if you could imagine an octopus living inside a shell, that's kind of what this animal is like. This is called a nautilus. So a nautilus is kind of like an octopus, but instead of having 8 arms, look at all of these. It has a lot more than 8 arms. These are all the arms. And in fact, if I had my little toy puppet nautilus with me, this chambered nautilus, these would be like the arms, but the arms are more than 8. They're more than 10. They're more than 20. They even have more than 30 arms. They can have up to 90 arms. 90 arms on this. But instead of having suction cups on it, they just kind of have this groove that helps them to stick to things if they need to. So they can grab their food with their tentacles or their arms that they have, and then they just kind of float around in this hard shell to protect them. They have this little hood that goes over their face, and they do have 2 big eyes, one on each side, just like you can see right there. But this right here, that beautiful color, again, almost looks like a zebra, doesn't it? Is kind of a brown coloring, and that's the hard shell that they have to protect themselves. So they just float around in the water, and all of those little chambers that we saw on my shell here actually are filled with air so that they can float and sink in the water as they want to. So they can control their own buoyancy by living in this outer edge right here and then taking all these little chambers and filling them with air and gas so that they can float or sink in the water. So these little animals that don't have any bones are still pretty amazing. They say, no bones, no problem for me. We are amazing marine invertebrates that live in the ocean without bones. So I hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of invertebrates with me. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us with Aquarium Online Academy and the Aquarium of the Pacific. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And if you were watching this as part of a class, we would love for you to let us know how many were in your class today and text us in your numbers. So thanks again for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.